games on this list planted themselves firmly in the Cyberpunk 2077 and No Man's Sky school of proving you can stumble out the gate and still score yourself a respectable placement, if not absolutely blow the haters out of the water with a, podium finish. While that sports metaphor well and truly fell apart, these games managed to come back together thanks to the tireless dedication of their developers and publishers. While lesser studios may have abandoned their problem children as soon as the audience turned on them en masse, that wasn't the case with these games, and given what they became, that's very fortunate for us. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 9 greatest comebacks in gaming. Number 9, Battlefield 4. Kicking off with a game that really should have done better, Battlefield and Call of Duty have been battling for supremacy in the shooter realm for some time now. But Battlefield 4 really handed the win over to Call of Duty when it launched in 2013, because even saying that this game launched feels like an oversell. More accurately, it did whatever the video game equivalent is of that clip with the cat who goes for the jump and then second guesses it at the last minute, and then it's like, woo, he goes straight down with his arms out. It was like that, but Battlefield. To say that Battlefield 4 launched pretty buggy doesn't quite hit the mark. The amount of game-breaking bugs and hilarious unintentional clipping and wild interactions with the environment, mechanics, and other players was nothing short of legendary. Developer DICE went as far as to halt work on all their other projects so they could get all hands on deck to fix Battlefield 4. The irate player base and criticism of the game's clearly unfinished shipped product went as far as to kick off multiple lawsuits investigating whether investors were intentionally misled by EA in their marketing of the game. And I think we can use these words, catastrophic disaster of a launch took an entire year and the development of a community testing environment to turn around. Once DICE and EA were able to get a handle on it though, the core of the excellent gameplay loop and engaging refined mechanics, compelling game modes, and phenomenal multiplayer were able to properly shine. Ultimately, Battlefield 4 did manage to outperform Call of Duty Ghosts, which came out in the same year, and when it was all fixed up, polished, and ready to go, proved itself to be one of the greatest FPS games of modern years. Number 8, Diablo III. If the phrase Era 37 causes a bunch of unmistakable confusion, frustration, and rage to bubble up within you, then you were probably playing Diablo 3 back when it launched in May of 2012. Or more accurately, you were trying to play Diablo 3. The error code was one of a handful of horrifying number combinations that meant you weren't going to be able to play the new hotly anticipated Blizzard RPG, but instead would contribute to an infamous meme that resulted from the game servers being massively overloaded. Of course, as embarrassing as it was, this wasn't the worst thing for Blizzard, as it meant a lot of people were keen to check out the game. Unfortunately, there were more complaints once they did. The frustrations that even single-player mode was always online, overly grindy RNG mechanics, and a full experience that just couldn't match up to the masterpiece entries in the series that had come before it. Enter 2014's Reaper of Souls, and 2 years worth of updates and patches in between, and Diablo 3 had become a totally different beast. From quality of life changes, including the way loot works, grinding works, and the addition of transmogrification, as well as the Crusader class and a bunch of new narrative tidbits, this now felt like the fully fledged Diablo experience we'd been hoping for. Seasons were added on top of new modes that let you play how you wanted, and most importantly, those bugs were being squashed and quickly. Essentially, it elevated what was a promising and solid experience into an excellent one, and for a series with the pedigree of Diablo, it really deserved nothing less. Number 7, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege. Games as a service tends to get a bad rap, and that's for a lot of very valid reasons, but at least in the cases of many of the games on this list, it does mean there's a dedicated team that are going to make sure they can continue to fix things and respond to player feedback over time. There are a few games on this list that fall into that category, and Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege is certainly one of them. This one launched riddled with bugs and glitches, which has quickly become a trend on this list, and will absolutely be continuing that trend to the end of it. While a single-player game like Skyrim launching riddled with bugs is bad, occasionally funny, but ultimately lets you play the game so long as you don't hit anything game-breaking, it's a different ballgame with multiplayer. Hit a snag with connection issues while you're playing a game that's multiplayer only, and the game is literally unplayable, which I think is the only time I've ever used that phrase earnestly. On top of that issue, the initially promising team-based shooter was peppered with balancing issues, rampant cheaters and no way to deal with them, and it was disappointingly thin on content. Flash forward 9 years and the game is as strong as it's ever been, thanks to a diligent team constantly tweaking, balancing, and injecting a slew of both free and paid downloadable content to bulk out the maps, modes, and operators, among other things. In what's a really interesting move, both IGN and GameSpot actually revised their initial review scores of the game to better suit the game in its current state. IGN bringing it 7.9 to an 8.5, and GameSpot bumping the 8 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. These adjustments were made as the service model turned the game into a totally different beast, and both outlets praised the game for being one of the best multiplayer shooters on the market, due to its tense and fast-paced matches. This has made all the more enticing through its unique requirement in mastering not only its combat mechanics, but also tactics, strategy, as well as team composition, cooperation, and communication. A wild 29 seasons in, and the game seems to be a hit with a bunch of different players. However, of course, there's still glitches and bugs like every live service game that's constantly getting new updates. Although, in this particular circumstance, at least fans who aren't happy with the way things are going came up with the fun phrase, Rainbow Fix Siege, which is honestly just fantastic. Number 6, Sea of Thieves. Sea of Thieves, or the pirate game, just not the one made by Ubisoft or Sid Meier, or the one with LeChuck, falls pretty neatly next to Rainbow Six Siege in that they're both examples of games that have benefited enormously from the divisive games as a service model. And not only that, they've made it far more worth your while if you dropped your dollars on them when they first hit storefronts. When Sea of Thieves set sail in 2018, a bunch of people were saying, sure, this looks cool, but what do I actually do here? To which developer Rare said, hold my banana. Because you eat bananas in the game. I realize phrasing that came off really weird, but I'm 2 lines down in the Google Doc now, so we're gonna have to keep going. That made more sense in the scripted version than the video version, but again, we're too far in. Let's keep going. As you'd have expected by now, if you didn't experience it for yourself, this one launched with more than a few dings in the hull. The bones of a solid experience were there, but without any skin or flesh or blood on them, yep, sorry, that got weird, players were lamenting that there was little of substance driving them to play beyond messing around with friends, having the odd cool emergent gameplay moment in a ship battle, and eating the aforementioned bananas. 2 years down the line in 2020, an IGN would chuck the No Man's Sky classic phrase at the game, stating it's the perfect time for players to give it another go as a result of a number of infrastructure fixes, bug patches, and buckets of new content. All of this was looped under the anniversary update, which was seen as something of a relaunch for the game as a whole. Come 2024, and that improvement train is kept on chugging, introducing new modes, free expansions, a seasonal format, and story-driven live events called Adventures. Like Siege, constant updates will always lead to constant bug fixing, but for those who wanted to see the game become what Rare originally intended, it's certainly done just that. I'm sure the 30 million players in 2022 and 5 million units sold didn't hurt either. Number 5, For Honor. Skipping all the way down from shooting times and pirate times to the times of good old sword and board, or whatever the other 33 heroes in this game were wielding, let's talk For Honor. Ubisoft's very first strategy action attempt didn't launch to the level of criticism that many of the other games on this list received, but its respectable sales and respectable review scores weren't exactly setting the game up to make waves for years to come either. For Honor is again a game as a service, but it uniquely requires a high level of finessing, tactical know-how, and precision combat maneuvers from its players, something bound to alienate certain groups looking for a more casual experience. What also alienated pretty much everybody from the outset was the way the game appeared to launch unfinished, with bugs aplenty, more server issues than you could point a greatsword at, and consumer-unfriendly nickel and diming. It was when Ubisoft released a $15 starter edition that drastically cut the price of entry, delivered a bunch of free updates, as well as substantial paid DLC, that it ensured its dedicated players would have reasons to keep coming back. 2 new factions totaling 9 new combatants later, all with different weapons and play styles, and the game has proven itself to be a great entry in the fighting genre, as well as having a pretty avid competitive scene. Number 4, Star Wars Battlefront 2. I keep running down these games and thinking I've hit the one that had the worst launch ever, but it's really hard to top Battlefront 2 in terms of hitting what can only be described as a perfect rhythm game streak of whacking every development, marketing, and launch faux pas on the head one after the other. That game with the really horrible microtransactions, as it was known for at least the first 6 months of its existence, EA fumbled a great IP yet again by getting a little too ambitious and a lot too gritty. synonymous with such an extreme level of loot box controversy that it kicked off US lawmakers discussing if the mechanic should be classified as gambling, and some countries even banning the game outright after deeming the inclusion so insidious it couldn't be on shelves. EA couldn't have put themselves or Star Wars Battlefront 2 in a worse position. This is a massive shame, as ultimately this became a game that was absolutely worth playing. Once EA and DICE swung back up from their rock bottom, illustrated by the most downvoted Reddit comment ever, where they suggested that making users unlock heroes gives them a better sense of pride, things started looking up. The pay-to-win mechanics were eliminated, and the game had its own Sea of Thieves style relaunch by way of the Celebration Edition in 2019. Excellent free updates that have added new content and ways to play have gone a long way to earning back the trust of players, as has the fact that underneath EA's bullshit, there's actually a really great core game in there, particularly the thrilling battles, impressively restrung progression system, and the pitch-perfect capitalization on the Star Wars IP. Number 3. Fortnite. The middling launch and then explosive success of Fortnite is a story that pretty much everyone on Earth knows at this point, but if you missed the battle bus, then let's talk about this cash cow that somehow even outmatched the next game on this list. The $26 billion revenue-generating battle royale game with the llama began life as a humble mission-based tower defense game, where you would build up your defenses in the hopes of holding out against those who would see your destruction. This was all totally fine, albeit fairly mediocre, but upon seeing the success of PUBG and its battle royale format, Epic said, we could do that, and do that they did, amassing an unfathomable number of players and led the pack in pressuring the video game big dogs to enable cross-play between platforms. Between its emotes, esports competitions, constantly updated content, and undeniably enjoyable gameplay loop, Fortnite has done a stunning job of capturing a market that was clearly hungry for just this experience. Whether it's your thing or not, Fortnite is an epidemic, or an icon, or both. Either way, I think we can all agree this is a moment in video game history we won't be forgetting anytime soon, so it's certainly a wonderful video game comeback. Number 2. Grand Theft Auto Online. Onto a game that would have a wildly impressive revenue stat for a live service property were it not for the cartoon juggernaut I just mentioned dwarfing every other online offering around. Grand Theft Auto Online also had to claw its way up to where it is today. The biggest issue here was that Rockstar decided they would release this online component just a couple weeks after they launched Grand Theft Auto 5, meaning it wasn't at all ready for the service lamp, and it was, say it with me, riddled with bugs. Patch after patch couldn't help this leaky-ass ship from going down, as players started losing their characters due to back-end bugs, and player outcry was at an all-time high. Making matters worse, trolls were an enormous headache to players just trying to enjoy the action-adventure playground. And even when that wasn't an issue, there wasn't anything compelling to do in the multiplayer city. Luckily, like every other dev team on this list, Rockstar decided to put their heads down and get to work, handing out free updates, new enticing modes, more ways to play, extra content, plenty of patches, events, and features, which all served up a super compelling platter that players could return back to. All that said, I feel like this is an important moment to point out that a lot of live service games really badly gear themselves towards crunch culture in video games, which, if you don't know, is basically running devs into the ground, making them work way too hard to continue to get these updates out. That said, apparently it's getting better, but just feel like we should put that out there. Number 1. Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. In what is probably the greatest comeback story in video games, even if we had put No Man's Sky on this list, the MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV launched, spectacularly failed for 2 years. Square's CEO stated the game damaged the entire brand, then they burned it all down, built it all back up again, rebranded, relaunched, and absolutely nailed it on the second attempt. Though the reveal that this second attempt, A Realm Reborn, would require players to subscribe, since that whole going back to the drawing board thing wasn't exactly cheap, it turned out to be an experience that was well worth paying for. The game offered cross-platform support and loads of small additions, as well as 4 incredibly substantial updates. 2015's Heavensward DLC, 2017's Stormblood, 2019's Shadowbringers, and 2021's Endwalker. These expansions both brought with them expansive and compelling campaigns consisting of hundreds of hours of new content, as well as new jobs, locations, dungeons, raids, and playable races. The reasons to return became relentless in the best way. Heavensward in particular literally nearly doubled the amount of content from the base game. Of course, the game is also ridiculously lucrative for Square Enix. The gorgeous, sprawling setting, refreshing and engaging progression systems, and exciting lore-rich story, more than worthy of its lofty franchise, are just the tip of the iceberg in calling out the fan-favorite features of A Realm Reborn. Not only is A Realm Reborn now one of the best MMOs ever made, it's also one of the best Final Fantasy games ever made, even if multiplayer isn't your usual way to play.